Good evening. Welcome to the first webinar presentation of the New York Metro chapter of Informs. My name is Jack Thur. I'm the chapter president, and we're very glad to have such a large participant at our meeting tonight. The way it's going to proceed is our speaker will present his topic, and he very much welcomes receiving questions during his presentation. And so you're free to submit questions. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and you simply type your question in there, and it will be forwarded to the speaker. He will also pause several times during the presentation, at which time questions can be submitted. If we get too many questions all at once, some of them will be saved until the end of the presentation, and then they'll be presented to him then. But all of your questions will be presented to the speaker. To help the speaker understand the audience, I've noticed from the registrants that there are some longtime Informs members here, and some of you are completely new to the association. I'll be telling you more about that, but we've designed a couple of polls that we'd like you to, click on the screen, and that helps the speaker understand more about the audience. So, can we please have the first poll question? Okay, it looks like almost everyone has voted. Let us go to the next question. Okay. Very good. Stop. Share results. Okay. I'm going to, there we go. Well, it looks like we have a very highly educated group with us tonight. Also, when we asked about your professional background, I noticed that 24% voted other. We debated how many questions we should have on that one, so next time around we'll have a few more choices. Before I introduce the speaker, again, some of you are long-timers, with Informs and in the operations research and analytics profession. And some of you are totally new and you don't really know who we are. So I've prepared a couple of slides just to say a few brief words for a few minutes before I introduce the speaker. So may I have the first slide, please? This year, Informs, by the way, Informs is an acronym that stands for Institute for Operations Research and the Management Sciences. This year, Informs is celebrating its 25th anniversary. However, its history goes back far further than that. 25 years ago, the two leading OR and MS organizations in the world, ORSA, Operations Research Society of America, and TIMS, the Institute of Management Sciences, merged and formed Informs. So the association goes back almost 70 years, serving professionals in the field of operations research and related fields. It's actually not a very old field. It began during World War II, and there's a very interesting history about that. Currently, before I get to that, just another tagline. A few years ago, Informs adopted the tagline, Operations Research, the Science of Better, which is how we like to see ourselves. The association currently has over 12,000 members worldwide. It has a number of publications. It publishes 16 scholarly journals from all aspects of operations research, management science, analytics, as well as 3 magazines. It has meetings and conferences throughout the year of all sorts. Some of them are broad topics, such as the annual meeting in the fall. There's the analytics meeting in the spring. And then there are also specialized conferences and meetings, such as marketing, transportation, simulation, and so forth. There's something for everyone. There are a number of communities that you can join to meet other professionals who share the same interest, and those take several formats. Informs has 18 geographical chapters around the world, of which New York Metro chapter is just one of them. There are 35 special interest groups. So if you have a special interest in, say, optimization, transportation, organizational science, marketing science, or practice, whatever, there's something for you there. We have four are communities that are a little bit different from everything else. They don't actually fit a specific field. One of them is junior faculty members and a few others. We also have 45 student chapters affiliated with universities around the country, and we have a very active one here in New York at NYU. Informs also offers numerous prizes, awards, certifications. There are competitions, all designed to recognize excellence in practice and research of operations research, management science, and analytics. To learn more about those fields and to learn more about Informs itself, we have a website. You see it at the bottom of the screen, informs.org. Go there. It's a wealth of information. You can easily get lost in it. But the next slide, please. As I mentioned, New York Metro chapter is one of 18 chapters around the world. We go all the way back to the beginning, practically. It was established in 1955, and the chapter has been very active. I've been active myself for the last 40 years, and in that time, every single month, the chapter has had an in-person meeting with a speaker. They were held in Midtown Manhattan, usually at an upscale venue with luncheon. Over time, we realized that the professional community, the work environment was changing. People could no longer get off a couple of hours in the afternoon. They didn't always work in Manhattan, and not everybody got reimbursed by their employer. So we had to retool ourselves. And we've, at the beginning of the year before the pandemic, we started having free meetings in the evening for members and a small nominal charge for non-members. That was to encourage them to join the chapter. But then the pandemic hit, and we can't even have those anymore. So now, going forward, we're going to have a whole series of webinars like the one we have tonight. And so stay tuned. We'll be sending out notices to those on our mailing lists. Participating in a chapter, as I mentioned, the chapters are geographic. They're intended to bring people within a geographic area together in some way. They're an excellent forum for networking with others in the field, for collaboration. If you have problems you want to share, a chapter is the place to do it. It's also a wonderful opportunity to volunteer. And those who do also develop excellent excellent leadership opportunities and learning opportunities as well. So we're a wonderful group of people to work with. It'll be a very positive experience. I stayed around this long for a reason. In that regard, we currently have an opening for a chapter webmaster. Our last one wasn't able to continue, and we're looking for someone to join our group and serve as our webmaster. It's not a big job. To learn more, contact me. My email address is at the bottom of the slide. And to learn more about the chapter itself, the website is down there too, informsny.org. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Russell Baris. He's been a friend of the chapter for many years, past speaker. When he was with Pfizer, through his efforts, Pfizer was a strong supporter of the chapter. They were a corporate member. They gave us meeting space for some of our conference meetings. And Russell and Pfizer have been a good friend for many years. Russell founded Illumidata in 2006. Making it one of the earliest data science companies. Illumidata works with partners across multiple industries to uncover relevant insights from data to achieve impact in ways that go beyond traditional analytics. Previously, Russ spent over 20 years at Pfizer, building and leading a management science group that was recognized with the Informs Prize. That's one of the prizes that Informs awards for excellence in operations research. He served as vice president of business technology and information science, and he led teams that brought numerous innovations to Pfizer. Russ has been a longtime member of the Informs Metro New York chapter. He has given talks at a dozen universities and has served on numerous advisory boards and nonprofit boards, including the Harvard Alumni Association Board of Directors, where he recently served as co-chairman of their Data and Discovery Committee. He holds a BA and MS degrees in Applied Math and Economics from Harvard. With that, I welcome Russell Baris. Thank you.
Hi. We've all seen how COVID-19 has changed how most of us live, work, and shop. For those of us in analytics, one profound implication of this has been that the historical data that organizations have come to rely on to decide things like which customers to target, which messages, products, or services to focus on, or to find optimal spending levels have become much less predictive than they used to be. Being able to understand how people made decisions a year ago just isn't that relevant to how they're acting right now, and it probably won't be that relevant for at least the next year. Making things even more challenging is that many organizations today have tighter budgets than they're accustomed to, and a more urgent need to figure out how to reattract former customers, or for companies that have been luckier of late, how to retain the customers that they scaled up their operations to support. I've had a lot of success in recent years, along with partners, in helping organizations gain value from data in situations where historical data just wasn't available. We've been finding that similar approaches can help when historical data may be available but are less relevant. And I'm pleased today by the opportunity to talk to you and hope that by sharing some of my experiences, they may be of some value to you. As Jack said, hoping that this will be a discussion as much as a presentation. So I invite you to submit questions in the Q&A window, and John Waldez and Abukar Abdallah will be curating the questions and moderating the discussion. The approach I'm discussing today is called rapid learning cycles, and the key focus underlying this approach is to accelerate the speed of learning. The faster you learn, the greater the advantage you can gain. Underlying rapid learning cycles are 4 principles, and I'll be telling a couple of stories about each of these, and then stepping back to talk about some of the lessons that I and my colleagues have learned from those. And the 4 principles are exploring your data, not just from one angle or looking at one segmentation, but from many different angles at the same time. Second, using data not just to answer questions, but equally as important, to keep finding better and better questions to be asking. Third, iterate rapidly. And fourth, don't just look for the results, but delve to find the stories behind the numbers. So, for looking at data from different angles, there are many different types of behavioral segmentations that can break down customers, and a customer can be a person or it can be an organization, in ways that tend to be consistent over time. One of the behavioral segmentations we found very useful in a number of different projects and industries is concentrators and spreaders. So to give you an idea, we've done a lot of work in grocery, and in the toothpaste market, my wife would be a classic example of a concentrator. She will have 1 tube of toothpaste at a time. If it runs out, she may or may not buy the same brand, because loyalists versus those who are brand fickle is a different dimension, but only 1 at a time. In contrast, I'm a classic spreader. I have a toothpaste drawer that will have 5 or 6 different tubes open at the same time. I don't know which is best, so I figure if I switch from different ones, I'll get a lot of the benefit. Well, it turns out that concentrator spreader applies in other markets too, such as among doctors. Among doctors, a concentrator would be the type of doctor who, if they saw 10 newly diagnosed diabetics, all 10 would get exactly the same prescription. The spreader is the doctor who wants to figure out exactly what's the best prescription to give each individual patient. And they'll ask a lot of questions around what other diseases might they have, what other medications they're taking, how compliant are they likely to be. And if they saw 10 newly diagnosed diabetics, between the 10, they might have 6 distinct types of prescriptions. Well, it turns out that that concentrator spreader is a really valuable dimension when you're looking at new products. In pharmaceuticals, About 2/3 of the new products introduced in the last decade have fallen significantly short of their market expectations. In grocery, the track record of new products is even worse. What we found has been in two different markets we've looked at, 75% or more of the spreaders had tried new products before even 10% of concentrators did. A really key way of looking at who to focus on as a customer, and yet none of the companies we've worked with have used the concentrator spreader dimension in planning which customers to call on. This is just one of, I'll give a few examples of the types of behavioral segmentation that we use. We have over a dozen that we found to be both relevant and useful. Behavioral segmentations tend to stay the same for a person over time, but there are also a lot of segmentations that will change for a particular person depending on their experiences. So one that we found to be particularly useful is to break down customers by their experience, the experience that they've had with a product to date. So the same person will respond to totally different messages or services or promotional offers when they've never tried a product versus when they just tried it for the first time. And that is likely to be very different than what people will respond to once they've been using the product regularly. One of the interesting things we found with this dimension is that the first 30 days after a customer first tries a product is often the period when they are maximally promotionally responsive. And yet most companies don't figure out who's just tried their product until it's too late to take advantage of that. If you can find that, again, it gets back to the faster you learn, the greater the advantage you can gain. We also had a situation where we were working with a product that was a rare disease drug. Rare disease drugs are becoming increasingly important as government incentives have resulted in many of them coming to market. But the numbers of patients are so small that most of the models that companies have used completely don't apply and are just not useful in the rare disease markets. So the need for analytics is even greater there than others. We had a project where we were working with a company that had a very good product, but it had gotten off to a very disappointing start. And we actually were working with a partner that specialized in helping companies turn around unsuccessful launches and reinvigorate the growth rates for the products. One of the things that this company had done is invest very heavily in an Ask an Expert program, which any customer, in this case there were doctors, could connect directly with a leading expert on this rare disease market. Great service, but the company had a pretty sophisticated analytics group. They had a good mark overall promotion response model, and they had basically concluded that this investment hadn't worked. When we broke down the cases where they had offered this service, though, based on product experience to date, we got a completely different view of what happened. What we found is we broke it into 7 distinct situations, starting with where the customer hadn't even heard of the disease up to the point where they'd had used the product many times. And found that in 5 out of the 7 situations, this Ask an Expert service was just not used. However, in the 2 other situations, it was enormously effective and very popular. The problem was 85% plus of the time when they'd offered the service, it was in the wrong situations. So what we found has been looking at data both based on multiple behavioral segmentations and multiple situational segmentations can make a big difference. Stepping back from this, we've seen that there's a long-term trend where the way companies do segmentation has evolved very gradually over the past 50 years. Back in the 70s and 80s, leading edge companies were finding that instead of promoting to all of their customers, if they just focused on the highest volume customers, they could be a lot more efficient in their promotion. This was the age when the Nielsen ratings appeared, for example, that allowed broadcasters to figure out which of their programs were appealing to the overall most valuable customers, which is often women between the ages of 25 and 45 in those days. And in other industries, deciling became popular, where customers were broken into 10 deciles or 5 quintiles, and only the highest deciles or quintiles were focused on. That helped. What helped even more was what started in the 1990s, where companies started doing second generation segmentation. Today, most of the companies we work with don't just market the same way to all their customers, but will have somewhere between 3 and 5 key segments. And they'll often give different personas to each of the segments. They'll market to them in different ways. In many cases, they track them in different ways. The second generation segmentation helped more. But what we're finding in the last few years is that many of the most advanced companies, certainly including companies that are like Amazon and Walmart, that others have been really challenged to compete with, have gone beyond that to take the approach of saying, for every service they offer, for every promotional message, every deal they offer, the lines between who respond and who don't respond are different. And if they just segment their market based on their key segmentations, in most cases, they're going to miss the lines that differentiate between who the responders are and who don't respond. So by segmenting their markets many different ways at the same time, they can gain insights that most of their competitors don't have. More and more companies are starting to adopt third generation type of segmentation, but as with the others, it's been a slow evolution, and certainly most companies aren't quite up to that point yet. The second principle is around, don't just use your data to answer questions, use the data to continue finding better and better questions to be asking. So in many industries, their companies have been able to track the order of what messages are being communicated. So, for example, in a lot of sales forces now have the sales reps equipped with tablet computers, occasionally laptops, for doing sales presentations. And one of the nice things about that is that they're able to track exactly which messages were being conveyed to which customers. For the ones who put the thinking up front to organize and track what is being communicated in each slide of a presentation, that can give enormously valuable data. And we found this to among the most useful data in terms of helping companies to be able to learn from what they're doing and optimize what they're offering to each customer. It's similar in terms of what you can do if you're doing banner marketing or other forms of web and social media marketing, where you can track responders by what they respond to and the order of what they click on, which can be translated to what messages to use. We had one case about a couple of years ago where we were doing an analysis to help a company. This is another case of a launch of a really good product that hadn't gone so well. And one of the things that we found in a very preliminary analysis was that one of their messages was if they changed the order in which two of their messages were presented, for reasons we didn't really understand, the average increase in use of their product went up 75% when they changed the order of the message, and didn't know why. So what we did was say, okay, there's something interesting going on here. We don't know what it was. So what we did was do sub-segmentation, where we looked at customers broken down by concentrator spreaders and loyalists versus fickle, and a lot of other dimensions, most of which turned out to be absolutely useless in figuring out what was going on here, because the concentrators were responding much the same way as spreaders. But we found one dimension where that was not the case. In a lot of markets, you have some customers or companies that are using psychographics to label their customers. And this company had looked at their customers versus the types of questions they were asking. And they had a dimension where some customers were viewed as simplifiers and others they labeled as scientists who are more sophisticated. And it turned out that when they changed the order of message, the more scientific customers in responsiveness increased not by 75%, but by 400%. And when this finding was presented to their management team, within about a minute, people lit up and said, I can tell you exactly why that's happening. They were raising, they were showing what their product did and the results, and only the more scientific were picking up on it in a different way than others. Well, if you have an insight that can literally quadruple your response with one group of customers, not only is that relevant in terms of what you do with them, it also says, gee, now you have a hook to be able to be much more effective with your more scientifically oriented customers. And indeed, this insight was translated into a very high impact. In a totally different market, we have a product which we've had for years for use in residential real estate. If you've ever gotten reports from companies that are in residential real estate on the market of on analytics for a local market, they tend to focus on two numbers, which are the most used and probably the most misused in real estate. One is what's happened with the average sales price in an area. Has it gone up or has it gone down? And which is useful, but unfortunately combines two different things. One is if the value of an individual property is going up or down, and the other is whether the mix of expensive, more expensive or less expensive properties are selling. So it can be misleading. But the other that's often used is the average days on market of the homes that are sold. And in general, it's been viewed that the lower the number is, the better the market is, the faster the homes are selling. Well, they say in real estate is about three factors: location, location, and location. And if you're in a company that's in the real estate brokerage business, one of the best things that you can identify is which market is just starting to heat up. Because if you can focus your attention on a particular neighborhood where the demand is about to really increase, you're going to have a big advantage over all your competitors who haven't gotten that insight. And it turns out that the best indicator of a market that's just starting to get hot is that the average days on market of homes jumped significantly. If the average goes from 45 days to 60 days, most people would interpret that as a bad sign, but what it actually can mean is that the old inventory that's been sitting unsold in the market is just starting to clear. And if you can pick on that before others can, that can be good. But it might, if you see the number jump, it might mean the market is heading up, but it might just mean that there's random variation in the data and there's some kind of a spurious correlation here, or that the market just got much worse. The answer here is to say you've gotten an indication and a preliminary insight. And the question is, well, what do you do with that when you have a preliminary insight, especially if the insight is not necessarily as reliable as something that would be coming out of a good, well-validated model, but it comes out more quickly. What we found that the answer here is using the data to keep finding better questions. I recently had an opportunity to collaborate with a consultant and a couple of academics on a paper that was published in Sloan Management Review, looking at shopping and saying, as stores are reopening, can we identify which groups of shoppers are most likely to want to return to stores versus which ones are most likely to say, to just stick with the often online purchasing approaches or curbside pickup that they had adopted. And then second, what kinds of offerings can a store provide that each group of shoppers is most likely to be interested in? What we found was that there are 5 groups of shoppers. This is a classic second generation type of segmentation. And that these 5 groups of shoppers were pretty tight clusters, and that behaviorally, each group was responding to very different things. I had a chance, I guess, to sort of test this out in practice in a way. Last week, I drove up to a shopping mall and initially went over to the parking lot outside of Macy's, and it was not hard to find a place to park. There were very few cars out there, and when I went into the store, it was very sparse. There were only a few people around browsing through this huge department store. But when I went over to the opposite side of the mall to Target, it was a totally different story. The parking lot was full. There were at least 10 times as many cars there as there were in the larger Macy's parking lot. And inside the store, it was as busy as it might have been pre-COVID. There were over a dozen checkout lines open, including a lot of the self-check. They were doing great. But one of the things that we saw is when we compared that to what you see here is the solutions, Target was focusing almost like a bullseye on providing value to at least 2 of these segments, the functional and diversion shoppers. Whereas Macy's offering was falling in between what any of these distinct segments were looking at. And people are talking about how what a terrible time this has been for retail. And yet Target isn't the only one that's thriving. Home Depot is thriving. Dick's Sporting Goods, I recently saw, has been thriving. The Costco, the biggest problem with our local Costco is being able to find a place to park. It's still so crowded. Even in this awful environment for shopping, there are some retailers who are doing outstandingly. And we think that this is part of it is simply that they are figuring out what the value propositions are that are appealing to different groups of shoppers. And they're doing it by asking a lot more questions and being able to hone in on what are the relevant groups of customers based on behavior and situation, and also what is it that they're responding to. A third principle of rapid learning cycles is Iterate rapidly. So here we find is that many organizations tend to do the analytics in some cases as part of an annual planning cycle, and in some cases a model are developed that will be used over a very long period of time. What we found here is that continually iterating, asking questions, getting answers, and then throwing out some of your hypotheses and then focusing more deeply on others is a successful model. In part because in a lot of cases today, getting your product sold is much more complicated than it used to be. There can be a variety of challenges to overcome. I have a friend who has a company that is designed to provide solutions to people who want to get caffeine, but prefer to get their caffeine from chocolate as opposed to from a beverage. It's a new grocery product, and what they're finding is that before they can get to their end consumer, they've got to go through the intermediaries of getting stocking. And that's true whether they want to go with in-person stores or online stores. Within the grocery world, Whole Foods is known as the leading early adopter. They are more willing than almost any other company in their industry to do a test of new products than others. And a company can often get an opportunity to do a test at a Whole Foods, which, by the way, is not inexpensive. But even once you get that test, you need to figure out and learn as much as you can about what pricing works for your product. How is your product packaged and displayed, which can make an absolutely enormous difference? What kinds of deals to offer? And you don't get a lot of chances because if your product doesn't sell, even an early adopter is not going to give you much more of a chance, let alone allow you to get to the fast follower state. It's the same thing in many areas of medicine today. It used to be that a doctor in most places could simply say, I'm going to write a prescription for a pharmaceutical product or for a medical device or a diagnostic test. Today, the doctor's options are significantly limited, but the way they're limited varies in some markets where they'll have a formulary, a list of products that doctors can prescribe. And if your product isn't on the formulary list, you can get a doctor to want to prescribe it. They can write prescriptions, but they're just not going to be filled. In other markets, there are what's called tiered formularies, where a doctor can prescribe anything they want, but the patient has to pay a copay. And for a product on a preferred tier, that copay can be as little as $0. And then on a non-preferred tier, it can be $80 or $100 a month. Needless to say, there aren't that many patients who are eager to pay an $80 copay, and most new products start off on the lowest tier. Well, we found in a few different markets that there's always some doctors, for example, who have the credibility to be able to prescribe a product and get it reimbursed when nobody else can. In many cases, it's the doctors who are being referred the patients of last resort, the ones who have failed every possible medication, every other type of service that other doctors have will often be referred to these doctors. Many of them are academic physicians who will work at major medical centers and actually are not going to be the doctors who write a lot of prescriptions and therefore are never going to be targeted by companies who are targeting on the basis of deciles. But what will happen is if that early adopter sees a patient who's failed everything else, they can see a new product, send a note to the local pharmacy director and say, Mr. Smith has failed 4 different things. Here is an example of a clinical study that suggested may help, and that doctor is going to get approval to try out the product almost every single time. If they have a success, many of these doctors are academic physicians, and the first thing they'll do after they have a success is do what's called a grand rounds presentation, where they'll, at a meeting attended by other leading doctors in their areas, they'll do a presentation talking about what they did and why it was successful. And many of the doctors who hear that presentation will immediately be in a position to become fast followers because they can cite the other doctor's success. Those are often the doctors who have control, or at least a lot of influence, on what products go on formulary. But what we found is fast followers and early adopters are interested in different things. The early adopters are often the scientists that I referred to before, the ones who keep up with all of the information on a product and are looking for hard evidence of that they can use. The fast followers are often folks who are looking to say, okay, I have a patient who's in a particular unusual category. Maybe it's somebody who is extremely unlikely to comply with the prescription they're given. Maybe it's somebody who has a particular comorbidity, a different disease that they have. And they're looking for evidence that says this will work in a particular population. But and the latecomers we find often are the ones who are most likely to respond to the simplest, broader messages that companies will use. If you're going to be successful in being one of the 1/3 of new drugs that are successful where 2/3 aren't, it really helps to be able to understand at any given time and in every local market, what situation are you in? And when you've been in that situation before, what has and hasn't worked? You can only do that if you have the data and the analytic processes to be able to iterate rapidly. In a very different area, have had the opportunity to work with some companies that were looking to optimize their websites. There are many organizations. What we found is there are a lot of brands that have websites that, when we've measured, the only purpose they serve is simply to be there. There's no strategic purpose whatsoever. In this case, we had a company with a large product that had a couple of, or actually multiple large products that were in the situation where their websites were like that, achieving no strategic value. And working with somebody who was just really great at being able to ask the questions of saying, what objectives can we accomplish through a website? And he found several. The 3 most common were, you can use the website to build awareness, to motivate somebody to try your product, or to get customers to self-segment themselves by giving you clues to what it was that made them interested in the product, and therefore what kinds of services or offers you could provide to them that group of customers would really value. And it turned out that out of all of the 3 options, the self-segmentation was the value proposition that offered potentially the highest outcome. What our team did was go into a series of A/B and ABC tests, where they would do things like move different buttons on the screen, change the wording that was used to describe them, or maybe offer some new kind of information or service that hadn't been offered before. And what they did was they do a test, and they would test rapidly, at the cycles as fast as a week. So a week would go by and they would see that more customers would respond to A or to B, or the different customers would respond to option A, B, or C. That allowed them to figure out how to offer different services to different customers. Ultimately, within a period of just a few months, they were able to take these websites and turn them from being totally non-strategic to very strategic, both in terms of the value that they provided to customers within the site, and even more so as a tool for learning how to customize their offerings to people based on which segments they were in. And when they were able to do that, the value of the learning extended well beyond the website into pretty much everything they were doing. One of the things that we found was, as we've gotten insights, especially in situations where we're getting insights rapidly that don't fit the decision cycles that many companies have, which are longer, is that different companies have different cultures that dictate how they tend to follow up on things. When I was with Pfizer, Pfizer's culture was, if you saw an idea that might work, do a pilot. Find a small group where you can quickly, inexpensively test things out and see if your idea works. And in truth, most of the ideas didn't work and were quickly abandoned, but the ones that did were the things that tended to generate real innovation. And it also powered a lot of people's careers because it was a company that valued people who were successful innovators. By piloting, you could try things out quickly, inexpensively, and learn really, really quickly. There are a lot of companies, though, that have no patience for pilots, no interest in taking that approach. And some of them will simply say, look, if I have a possible insight, for example, find a market that might be a valuable one to evaluate, valuable real estate market that might be getting hot, I can wait for the results of a pilot, or I could just jump in with both feet and see if it works. And especially in cases where it's not too expensive to do that and there's low risk, those companies will say, look, if I go for it and I guess right, I'm going to be so much faster than my competitors, I'm going to get a big advantage. And if I'm wrong, there's relatively low risk. Some cases, there's a higher risk where you really wouldn't want to do that. But some companies have that kind of a culture. There are others that are a little bit more cautious that simply say, okay, we see an insight that might be useful. Let's watch and see if that same insight proves out one or two more times before we do anything with it. One of the things that we've learned from working with different companies is it's hard to force a company to innovate in a different way than their culture dictates. But all of these approaches can work. Depends on the culture, depends on the company's risk tolerance, but that all of these approaches can offer big advantages in enabling a company to respond to what works with its customers much faster than the companies that aren't gaining the insights in the first place, aren't geared up to take advantage of it in any way. And the final principle is looking for the stories behind the numbers. So we had, I had an opportunity to lead a large project that had one of the really classic marketing challenges. The company's largest product was an older product that had been extremely successful, still generated a lot of sales, although the sales actually rate had matured and the sales were actually declining slightly. And the company also had a newer product that was similar, but fundamentally better in a few notable ways. Not necessarily better for every customer, but better for many of them. And the company had taken a very cautious approach. They'd assigned each product to a different division of the company. They were constraining the marketing of the newer product to not overly cannibalize the older one. And the result was that the new product hadn't gotten off to as good a start as they wanted, and the older product was still declining. We did a lot of research, a lot of the kinds of things that we're talking about today. In this case, we actually did have some historical models, and this kind of techniques, can be used if you do have a good promotion response model. We've actually even used it with recently with some good machine learning models, and it's great if you do, but this kind of approach can also be used without any models, just by looking at comparative growth rates. In this case, though, we had a lot of models to use, and what we came up with was a strategy that said, the company, if you, instead of marketing the product separately, you acknowledged the similarity with customers, you had both of your divisions selling both products, but niching them by being able to articulate which cases a customer would be better with the older product and which cases they'd be better with the newer product. We calculated that the company would do much, much better with the new approach. But at every level at which we did the presentation, and there were 4 levels of presentation that started with the product brand team and ended up with the CEO of the company and the company's senior executive committee. Before we started presenting, the senior person turned to us and said, "I'm going to listen to you, but I have to tell you, I really don't like what you're proposing." Fortunately, we had a really key ace in the hole, that the project team included some really great market researchers that had organized focus panels all over the country with real customers talking about how they viewed the 2 products and why they used them the way they did. And instead of just presenting the numerical results and claiming what our ROI would be, we started every part of the presentation with real customer stories. And as I've learned from communications experts, stories sell. Logic, in many cases, just gets by itself, gets people to look about and saying, is there a way of debunking the logic? By being able to go in with compelling stories started by real customers and then following it up with data saying, if you do what the customers are saying, here's both products are going to perform better. We went and with every presentation on the spot with each of the management teams turning around and giving an approval to the project that they had just started off by saying they didn't like very much. And it's a lucky thing that they did, because the project was approved around the middle of the year. By the end of the year, the newer products growth rate started really taking off. And maybe surprisingly to some people, the older product that had matured and was declining started growing again too. The net dollar difference in sales by the end of that calendar year was over $80 million. And over time, this change in the strategy was documented to have increased the company's not only top line, but bottom line by in excess of $1 billion. We find that the looking for the stories behind the numbers, though, works in routine cases as much as it can within something like a major study like this, the classic market challenge. And had a case where we were working with a company that had its sales force spend a significant amount of time, especially when their product was being launched, by asking questions of their customers and recording the information within their customer relationship management computer system. And that was not universally popular. Some of their sales reps basically pushed back hard saying, I'm just not going to do this. You're not paying me to be a data collector. You're paying me to sell, and I'm going to sell, not collect data. At the end of the project, we went through and looked at all of the different things that the company had did. Every marketing program, every sales program, and a bunch of them had been pretty successful. It turned out the highest impact activity that they did was asking questions of the customer. That for some reason, and unfortunately in this project, we didn't get to follow up and ask why, but for some reason it seemed like just asking questions of the customer made the customer think more and got them more interested in trying their product. It also had the effect of generating a lot of qualitative learning that individual sales reps were able to use to better understand which of their messages had gotten through to the customer and which of them hadn't. And that many of them were then able to learn and refine what they were doing. And at the end, what we found was we had perfect data showing which customer or which sales reps had refused to ask any of the questions, and every one of them was in the bottom 15% of performers across the board, across the company. Just asking the questions, learning the stories, appears to have value even besides the learning, in that it can help inspire your customer to think differently. So, in summary, what we've seen is that if you look at your data, not just one way, but from many different angles at the same time, and use it to keep finding and asking better and better questions as rapidly as you can, what we've seen is the clients developing what we call virtuous learning cycles. The more they learn, the better the questions they can ask, the better the insights they can get. And often, in many cases, it's the insights and how to organize their data that allow their models to work much more effectively, even in the cases where they have historical data. In the cases where there's no historical data, what we found has been that this approach will often generate the insights that will allow the companies to be able to start implementing refinements that allow them to make much better use of their resources and support their customers much better. And if they not only do the learning, but find the stories behind the numbers, not only do they learn better, that their ability to sell their ideas within their organizations has been greatly enhanced. So in summary, what rapid learning cycles is all about is empowering agility, enabling a company to be far more agile than it started out being. And as we talked about, most product launches fail. But the interesting thing that we saw in pharmaceuticals is it's not even across the board. When we looked at the companies that had 5 or more launches during the decade of the 2010s, they fell into 2 clusters. There were a smaller number of companies that were successful on their launches about 70 to 80% of the time, and a larger group that was successful somewhere closer to 20% of the time. And a lot of it was based on the agility of the companies. If you're agile, it means you don't have to guess right in how you're going to launch the product before you actually do the launching. If you can keep finding better and better questions to ask and better ways to refine, that helps. And by the way, when I followed up with some retail marketing experts describing the situation that I saw at Macy's, one of them turned to me and said, what you're seeing is not just a reflection of the marketing strategy. It has a lot to do also with their buying, and gave an example of a well-known company that's in the office supply space and said, this company's purchasing cycle starts 9 months in advance when they place all of their orders. By the time they find that what people want to buy doesn't match up with what they're ordering, it's too late for them to adjust what they're doing for at least the next 9 months. And as you know, in the period post-COVID, look what's happened, where we are now versus 9 months ago. Part of the problem they attributed what I saw at Macy's to is they simply don't have the right inventory for what people want and don't have the agility to be able to adjust fast enough. I don't have the data to say if it's true, but it's an interesting hypothesis about why agility is stronger. Target, on the other hand, is a company that is known for having become extremely agile, not only what it orders, but customizing what they will sell in one store versus in other stores, being able to reallocate inventory. The other thing that we've learned that really came as a very pleasant surprise after doing a lot of these projects is that most people go into projects expecting that agility is going to be expensive. And what we found is that's not actually true. More often than not, companies end up spending less when they're agile because they're quickly able to learn what's working and what's not working and cut off the investments or reallocate them in what's not working. And in many cases, as one memorable client said to us at the start of the project, all I want to learn is how much do I want to spend to take my product that's at 17% of budget and get it to 100% of budget. And in the end, not only were they able to get the product back on track, but they were able to cut their spending almost in half. So we, I guess, got through the presentation without Q&A, but I would be delighted to take any questions you have. And I hope that you've found this interesting. Look forward to discussing ideas and welcome you to question or challenge any of the things that I've been talking about. Thanks.
Thanks, Russ. Russ, we have one question from the group. How much of the medical pharma community rapid learning experience can be capitalized on by other industries? Is it a broader approach?
So I would say the rapid learning is something that we've done across a number of different industries. There are certain things that are unique to pharmaceuticals and particularly around some of the particular types of restrictions that a new product faces. But what we've seen in terms of the types of questions that come up and even the types of segmentations that are useful have gone across categories to a much greater degree than I would have initially expected.
Thanks. And then I had a question listening to you. What are some of the problems you found in using the 4 principles in specific corporate situations? I'm thinking of data, difficulty of having the right sort of data, difficulties of having the right sort of resources and all. Could you talk a bit about that, please?
Sure. So data and resources are certainly factors. And one of the things that we've found is in a lot of cases, we've been able to help people with collecting data. Many of the things like when you're using your Salesforce to interact with customers, you're able to augment your data in many cases pretty quickly and very inexpensively. There are ways of using surveys and to be able to augment data. And there are often things you can do with that. The toughest problem that I've seen in working with companies is a lack of alignment within the company that makes changing what they're doing much harder. this is particularly true, from my experience anyway, in companies that are organized very tightly by function, where each function operates somewhat as an island and makes plans independent of the other functions. Some companies are much more integrated and will require, a sales, marketing, and product development to all have a single operating plan versus the groups that have it separate. What we found in the companies that are more functionally siloed and therefore not as easy to align is that it can help to prepare by doing workshops way in advance. So if it's a new product being launched, recommend doing the workshops somewhere between 6 and 18 months before the product launches. And the workshops will often start by getting people in different groups to articulate the challenges that they see and while everybody else is around, and then getting everybody before the product launches and the intensity picks up to be able to understand that they're going to need to have a much more flexible process in order for each of them to kind of hit their own goals and coordinate with others. But we found that those workshops and the other things early on to get people to coordinate with each other. In some cases, we've actually had people meet each other for the first time in some of these sessions because remember a case where I was at a large technology company and we were working with some of their top corporate executives, and we had some people from the product management team in. And they called in the people in the product development team for the same products. And when they walked in the room, the first thing they did is they went over to their colleagues in marketing and introduced themselves because they had never met. It's tough to be agile and well coordinated in that situation, but it was fascinating to see by the end of our meeting, these people were having a great time sitting down, comparing notes with each other, looking for ways that they could help. And we found similarly, most of the workshops we've done, we get very enthusiastic engagement among people who don't work together as closely.
Okay, thanks, Russ. We have some more questions. One is, what is the meaning of the days on market, where you said that when the days on the market went up, it was a positive indication of market activity in some cases? I think there is an interest in having a bit more explanation of that.
Sure. So in most real estate markets, when they publish the data saying the average number of days on market, if the average product that sells has been sitting on the market for 60 days or longer, that's considered a weak market. If the average product that sells is in 30 days or less, that's usually a great market because it means most of the products sell within the first month. Most of the houses sell within the first month. When you see the average days on market in an area jump from, say, 70 up to 90, most people interpret that as a bad sign. It suggests that the market is slowing down. But what we found has been that what actually happens in the early stage where a market starts picking up is that the old inventory, the houses that have been sitting unsold, in some cases for more than a year, start selling. When that happens, you're averaging the houses that sell quickly with the ones that have been on the market for 200 or more days. So that the parameter of the average days on market of the houses that sold will often jump, sometimes very significantly. If you're looking for that, it's the best indicator we've found to be an early warning that said the real estate market in this particular neighborhood or this town is starting to get really hot. And
okay,
if
thanks,
you're the
Russ.
realtor, that's the time for you to be reaching out to customers, engaging them, and being the first one to let them know. Because when you're telling them something that turns out to be right, that builds a lot of confidence in your credibility, and can really help establish somebody's reputation and bring a lot of listings.
Thanks, Russ. And then there's another question. The concept of spreader versus concentrator, is it applicable only for a low value product, or can it be applied to a product generally expensive, which needs research by the customer before purchase?
And yes, it certainly can apply to expensive products. And in pharmaceuticals, there tends to be a gap between the what they call the small molecule products, the traditional pharmaceuticals, for whom many of the products that we would sell at Pfizer might cost less than a dime per tablet to manufacture. The research costs and the physician education costs were enormous and needed to be factored in. For most biotechnology products, the manufacturing costs can be very significant, sometimes in the thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars per patient. So those are almost always really expensive products. But again, we find that same factor is, if there are multiple products, the process that a doctor uses to decide what to do. There are some doctors who will just follow a pathway, which is the term they'll use for an algorithm to say, first try this product, then try the next one, then try the next one. And if you have a doctor whose approach is very algorithmic, it's going to be very different to influence them than it is if you have a doctor who's looking to simply say, I just want the best thing for this individual. Medical devices, again, tend to be more expensive and will work the same way.
Thanks, Russ. That's all the open questions we have. Jack?
Yes. Well, Russell, thank you so much for a very wonderful presentation, and most timely in this time of COVID-19, when the world is changing so fast. The topic of agility reminds me of a winner of the Franz Edelman competition about 19 years ago. For those who are not familiar with it, Informs has a competition for the best implemented practice around the world. And this is an annual competition, and it gets submissions from all over the world. The case that I'm reminded of is a very different type of product than the ones that you've described. 19 years ago, after 9/11, the airline industry was totally disrupted. And all of the airlines, except for one notable one, had difficulty getting their feet on the ground again. And that was American Airlines. American Airlines, their scheduling and their whole way of bringing their product to the market was one of flexibility and agility. And they were able to retool their operation so quickly and get flying again efficiently that they won first prize of the Franz Edelman competition back then. So in times of crisis, in times of change, agility seems to truly be the cure. So, the examples you gave are very applicable. With that,
If anybody has questions and would like to discuss things further, please, I think my email address is on the slides, and the slides will be available. So if anyone wants to reach out with questions, I'm delighted to talk further.
As part of my closing comments, I'd like to introduce the team that was working behind the scenes. Along with me is John Walders, who we've seen. He's been wearing several hats at the chapter. He's the chapter treasurer. He's in charge of arrangements, and he fills in for everything else that we need him for. He worked in industry for many years and has now been in retirement. The other person who has been indispensable is Abu Bakr Abdallah, who is also president of the Informed Student Chapter at NYU. And these are the people who, along with the wonderful staff at the Informs Business Office, that have been able to bring this presentation to you. I can't thank staff at Informs enough. They have been just so wonderful, and they've helped us in so many ways. With that, just as my closing remarks, I want to tell everyone that this presentation has been recorded, and after some small editing, it will be uploaded to the chapter website, along with the speaker's presentation slides. I don't know how soon that will happen. We're still looking for a new webmaster. Volunteers are welcome, although we're getting some temporary help, so it may happen sooner than later. Someone just raised a hand. Leon, is that a help to volunteer? Oh, yes, you have good connections. We'll be in touch. Thank you. Let's see. Yes, our website, informsny.org. Go there and visit and look around. If you click on the events tab and past events, you'll see all of the presentations we've had for over many, many years. And in many cases, it also includes the speaker's presentation slides. And you'll see how diverse our chapter presentations have been. And we want to continue that that process, at least for the foreseeable future, with webinar presentations. And below is my email address. Feel free to contact me about anything. If you have comments, suggestions on how we can improve our webinars, complaints, all of that, we'll take it, okay? Feel free to contact us. And and of course, we're always looking for speakers. We have a group who are already waiting to speak. We just have to schedule them. But if there is a topic that you want to hear about, or if you know of a speaker you would like to hear, please contact me and we'll get that taken care of. With that, let's see. So there's question and answer here. Susan Werman asked a question about the American Airlines example that I gave. And and she asked if that was Tom Cook. It may have been. Tom Cook was head of the operations research group at American Airlines for many years. It may well have been him. Of course, we can find that that Edelman entry on the Informs website. Just find Franz Edelman and go back to, I don't know, 2001, 2002, and it'll be there. Susan asked when the next lecture is. We don't have that scheduled yet. Excuse me. I'm hoping to get one set up for January. And of course, everyone will be notified. And yeah, Susan also commented that Tom Cook was very active with Informs. In fact, he was president of Informs for a year. And it was under his presidency that we had a market research program done, and they're the ones who came up with the tagline, Operations Research, the Science of Better. Susan, I'll answer your next question by email. So with that, we have no open questions, and unless we have something, I'll wish everyone a good evening. Leon, I'll answer your question also. Oh, people keep throwing things up. Oh. Okay. We're getting comments and questions here. Howard Finkelberg, who's a past president of the New York chapter, who worked for American Airlines way back before he joined BBDO and is now retired, wrote, was Barry Smith, who worked for Tom Cook. I believe so. I think so. The Dynamo Project was based on my white paper. Okay, so Howard, we're with good company here. Thank you for your help. Let me just check. Okay, I think that's it. I'd like to wish everyone a good evening and happy holidays. Thank you for coming, and we'll be in touch about our next webinar. Thank you and good night.